Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and we are the Astrology Star Sisters. And today we're talking about Uranus stations retrograde. And my guest and astrology star sister is Madam Simon. Welcome, Simon. Glad to have you back. How are you?
Glad to be here, Liz. Thank you. How you doing?
I'm getting projects finished, that's for sure. So we're having Uranus station retrograde in September of 2025. Simon is an archetypal astrologer, tarot reader, and visionary artist, and her website is iconalchemy.com. I'm an astrologer, author, intuitive, and tarot reader, and my website is alightpath.com. And we're going to start with Gemini because Uranus is in the sign of Gemini, just to give a few basics. Gemini's of the air element. It's about communication, change. It's a mutable modality, so tying up loose ends to begin new projects. The ruling planet is Mercury. The mantra is I think, and I'll let Simon do the keywords and caution.
Okay, so some keywords for Gemini are ideas, information, multitasking, intellect, student, versatile, sociable, siblings, neighborhood, and community. And some of the cautions are overthinking, superficial, gossip, and flip-flopping opinions.
And we're talking about Uranus. Uranus is the Greek god of the sky, Ouranos, the only major planet not named after a Roman god. Its orbit is approximately 84 years and stays about 7 years in a sign. The modern ruler of Aquarius, traditionally ruled by Saturn, but the modern ruler is Aquarius. Uranus is an ice giant that has 13 rings and spins on its side. And you want to give us the definitions there?
Okay, so Uranus is associated with sudden change, creative expression, freedom, eccentricity, originality, independence, revolution, invention, the spark of genius, the unexpected, liberation, breakdown, and of course, it's the great rebel. Um, and some cautions are it can be associated with destruction, disruption, extremism, impatience, boredom, restlessness, detachment, and unpredictability. Um, and I do notice that we seem to have missed one thing that it does tend to be associated with um, uh, are things like electricity and technology. Um, and so, if you've been experiencing some technological issues or quirks um, recently, it may be in connection to Uranus' station.
Thank you for catching that one. That one's really important. So Uranus stations retrograde on September 4th or 5th on the west coast and on the 6th on the east coast of the United States at 1 degree Gemini in 27 minutes. And will stay retrograde until February 3rd when Uranus stations direct at 27 degrees of Taurus in 28 minutes. And this chart is for Seattle, of where Uranus is at in the chart. And so the aspects to Uranus are a conjunction with Sedna, a sextile to Saturn and Neptune, a trine to Pluto, semi-square to Ceres, and a semi-sextile to Hygeia. So want to tell us about all that, Simon?
Yeah, sure. Just had to re-plug in my computer. Speaking of electricity and technology, I realized, oh, we're not going to get very far if it's unplugged.
Exactly.
So, let's see. So first of all, there's the conjunction with Sedna. Sedna is one of the minor planets known as a trans-Neptunian object. So it's hanging out in the area of Neptune's orbit, kind of Neptune-Pluto area. some of these actually go all the way out into the Oort cloud. So I don't remember exactly where this one is. But Sedna has a really, really long orbit and very elliptical orbit. And so it takes 11,000 years for it to go around the zodiac. So it's less a matter of Sedna coming to other planets and more other planets coming to Sedna. And Sedna is, it's got this association with both victimization and power. So like a lot of planets in that area, there are some kind of Plutonian themes that will go along with it. Sedna is named for an Inuit goddess of the depths of the sea. And she's a goddess who kind of needs to be respected or even appeased in order to ensure that the creatures of the sea yield themselves to hunters. Okay. So when we are looking at any planet in aspect with Sedna, then issues of power and powerlessness are going to come up. Okay. And in particular, a good use of our time when we experience these kinds of transits is to pay attention to where do we feel helpless and how can we reclaim our own sense of agency, even if, there's things that are beyond our control. True control is an illusion, but recognizing where we can find silver linings, recognizing where we can grow in our own inner power, and confront our depths, confront our fears. That's good use of Sedna transit time. Okay, so there's that conjunction with Sedna. And then Uranus is sextile Saturn and Neptune, and trine Pluto. Those are ongoing transits. Since all of these are outer planets, they all move very slowly. And so they mark generational shifts and themes that stretch out for many years at a time for everybody on the planet. Okay. Uranus sextile Saturn and Neptune has this, it's a supportive relationship between the planets, but because it's Saturn, that means there's lessons to be learned. And, Saturnian lessons are not always fun. But again, if we lean into trying to find the silver lining in those lessons, then we can do things like, improving the structures and systems that we are dealing with in our lives. We can work at addressing our responsibilities in new ways. Okay. And then with Neptune in the works, there can be confusion about that, even deception, but there can also be big vision, imagination. Neptune sextile Uranus in particular is great for these kind of aha moments, for seeing outside the box and getting inventive. Okay. And then the trine to Pluto. So Pluto is transformational and definitely relates to wealth and power, relates to institutional power in particular. Pluto is definitely a planet of oligarchs. And so when we are looking at that in this trine with Uranus and Sedna, then the insights that Uranus can bring to us, but also our desire for liberation, our uh, willingness to go against the grain is getting fed by that institutional power. Now, I find that very interesting. You know, there's this kind of ongoing relationship um, between all of the planets. They all have their synodic cycles, right? Um, and so each planet at some point will conjoin another, and then they're going to go around the zodiac and be in relationship to each other. Okay. Um, and so, particularly with Uranus and Pluto, um, Uranus and Pluto conjoined in the late 60s, and then they went through a square. Oh, goodness. I think that square was around 2012, 20.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I think it was around 20, somewhere in that general region. About 10 years ago, I would say, actually. And now it's in this trine. Okay. And so we see each time those things happen, there's this kind of push-pull between institutional power and feelings of rebellion or even revolution. Okay. And so now they're in this trine, which is a flowing aspect, but keep in mind that flow, that doesn't automatically mean that it's good or bad, right? It just means that there's kind of this increased interaction between the desire for liberty and the desire for power, between institutional power and technology, and then this kind of disruption, transformation that goes along with both of those. Okay, so this is an ongoing theme that we are seeing at this time. So then there is also the semi-square between Uranus and Ceres. So that one's interesting. So a semi-square is, it's basically half a square, okay? It's 45 degrees, and a square is 90 degrees. And half a square gives, it's kind of like a more subtle version of the friction of a square, okay? A square is, kind of, there's that butting heads kind of going on. And it can be, these lessons that are about challenges between the two planets, and trying to integrate what both planets want, even though they're not getting along, right? But in this case, it's more like it's a bit of a smaller irritation, but it's still there. It's kind of like having a sore spot on the roof of your mouth that you can't quite stop putting your tongue on. You shouldn't. Okay, that's what that's like. Okay, so Uranus semi-square Ceres. Ceres is one of the goddess asteroids, sometimes called the mother of the asteroids. She's a big old dwarf planet, really. And Ceres relates to what nourishes and nurtures us. Name for the goddess Ceres, who is also known as Demeter, and from whose name comes cereal. Okay, so a goddess of agriculture. And so when I see Uranus semi-square Ceres, that immediately calls to mind disruptions in food. Whether that's food production, food distribution, especially with Uranus involved, it could very much relate to, how does tech affect our food? So, for example, data centers. There's been some ongoing conflicts between, the local residents in areas surrounding where data centers have been built and are eating up resources. Okay. Um, and so I very much see that as being connected to this semi-square to Ceres. Okay. But again, going back to Uranus being conjunct Sedna, you know, just because there are those kinds of disruptions or conflicts doesn't mean we should just sit here and feel victimized by them. Instead, we need to consider, how do we reclaim our power? Okay. Um, and, how do we do that? Whether that is by using technology in new ways, or, disrupting current systems, or, finding ways to think outside of the box. Uranus doesn't like to do things in the same old way. Okay. Okay. So this is an impetus to change. The semi-sextile to Aia, Aia is associated with health and hygiene. Um, in the sign of Cancer, she's going to be concerned with the health and hygiene of home and family. Okay. And also, what does our emotional health look like? Okay. And Aia can both show us what is in need of help and how to do the helping. Okay. Um, and so in Cancer, Aia is going to show us where, maybe we have a tendency to wall ourselves off from others, where we get overly self-protective or extra moody, right? Where we're feeling some emotional hurts. And then she encourages us to, among other things, connect with others who are closest to us, with family and close friends, in order to perhaps talk out what is going on with us. So, it's kind of within the hurt is also the medicine. Yeah. And so when we see Aia in this semi-sextile with Uranus, the semi-sextile can give like there's a little bit of friction there, even though it's not, considered a hard aspect like the semi-square. It's more a matter of the next sign in the progression of the zodiac is where the planet in the previous sign is headed toward. And so it's like it's getting a preview of what's going to happen when it reaches that spot. So when we see planets semi-sextile, they are 30 degrees apart. Okay. And so in this case, both Uranus and Aia, both Ouranos and Sedna are looking forward to the place that Aia currently occupies. Okay. And so that's interesting. It kind of gives us this sense of like, okay, so what could we see that in terms of foreshadowing for technology? And for addressing questions of power and helplessness. Okay. And it definitely suggests that in order to perhaps address fears or concerns about those things, that we need to look closer to home.
Maybe some new ways to work with health and wellness, maybe mental health or digestive health too. So,
Yes, especially with IE and Cancer. Yeah.
and I want to expand on how you say it's a foreshadow, because Uranus being in Gemini for the last several months has kind of given us an idea of what Uranus and Gemini is going to be like, but it's going to back into Taurus and finish up some work that it has. So, it's kind of repeating that foreshadowing, because we've had a big example of that. And it's really interesting that all the planets that Uranus is making contact with, except for Hygeia, are all retrograde. So do you want to talk about planets being retrograde for a moment?
Yeah, let's talk about planets being retrograde. So, when planets are retrograde, first of all, obviously they are not actually traveling backward through the solar system. It's an optical illusion. They appear to be going backward, based upon how fast the Earth is traveling, how fast they are traveling, and where they are in relation to each other. Now, planets that are retrograde are closer to the Earth than they are when they're not retrograde. And so their themes are emphasized, but because they're retrograde, those themes are more likely to be internal. Okay. So, for example, Mercury is, of course, the most notorious planet that goes retrograde because it does it 3 times a year, right? And and it tends to be associated with lots of havoc in areas that are kind of pertinent to everyday life. It's a personal planet, so of course that's going to be the case. It's going to feel more personal when it does stuff. But all of the planets, well, with the exception of the moon and the sun, obviously, but all of those other planets are going to go retrograde at some point, okay? But when they do, they're asking us to reconsider their themes, okay? To reevaluate and sometimes repeat, okay, the processes that are associated with them. However, when you think about that, even for planets that aren't very personal, okay, when we have to repeat things, when we have to reconsider or reevaluate things, that can feel personal. That becomes a more internal process, right? If I'm, thinking back to something I said and, maybe regretting it a little and wondering what I could have said better, until I actually decide to say something else to somebody about it, it's an internal process doing that reconsidering. Okay. And so, retrograde, that prefix, we associate words that have that prefix with retrogrades. And they urge us to pay attention to what's going on underneath the surface with regard to their themes. Okay. So, for example, when Venus goes retrograde, okay, Venus deals with relationships. And so often we will experience kind of return of like friends or past relationships, okay, unfinished business in that area. But that's urging us to reconsider, how do we feel about that relationship? Okay. Did things wrap up the way that we wanted to? Or do we want to go back and like revisit that relationship? Okay. So when we're looking at outer planets like Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, they also go retrograde, but they're retrograde typically for 5-6 months out of the year. Okay. And so when we're looking at these planets, we're being asked to go inside and pay attention to their themes. And it is a bit like how seasons encourage us to behave in slightly different ways. Okay. Now, for some people, maybe they really like winter sports and skiing and stuff, but I'm not a winter sport kind of person. So when things get colder, I'm inclined to go inside and spend my time, cocooned away and knitting and doing all the other things I do indoors. Okay. And that's a bit like what it's like for us during retrograde times. Not so obviously, we're not all like hiding out away from, the rest of life, But the processes associated with those planets are becoming more internal, more personal, more private. And so in the case of these outer planets, with Uranus in particular, which is, our topic today, we are being encouraged to reconsider what excites us, what liberates us, okay, what disrupts us, what perhaps puts a barrier between us and other people, because Uranus can be associated with disassociation, okay? And so, especially with this particular one, Uranus can be really disruptive. And I do feel like, just in terms of what I've been noticing, but also what other people have been reporting to me, as Uranus has slowed to station this time around, there's definitely been some technological mayhem. I've experienced that personally. But also, there can be kind of disruptions in our sleep patterns. Okay. There can be feelings like our nerves are maybe a little on edge. Or in turn, we can feel like maybe increased boredom, or like, the things I thought were fun, I don't feel fun right now. Why don't they feel fun? Okay. And that's because we're being asked to reconsider what excites us, what makes us feel free, what stimulates our minds, what is, helps us to think outside of the box, all of those things. And that's what we're being asked to pay attention to between now and February, which is when Uranus stations direct.
Well, that was a great explanation. Thank you. So getting back to our charts, we're going to look at the aspect patterns that this Uranus stationing retrograde has. We have a cardinal T-square between Jupiter, Mars, and Ceres, and a water grand trine kite between Jupiter, North Node, Lilith, and the South Node. So go ahead and jump in wherever you'd like.
Okay, so I've already talked a bit about Ceres, but here we see Ceres in this kind of tense T-square between Jupiter and Mars. So the Jupiter-Mars square was a little earlier, a few days ago, but we're still feeling it a bit. And when Jupiter touches anything, Jupiter makes things bigger. And Jupiter's a benefic. He's trying to be helpful. Okay. But sometimes that can mean excess. Sometimes that can mean being overly enthusiastic about something, only to realize, oh, maybe that wasn't something I wanted to be so enthusiastic about. We can get some kind of some bombastic, even self-righteous behavior when Jupiter is in a hard aspect with something. And Jupiter does govern faith, religious faith, spiritual faith, faith that the sun will rise tomorrow. Okay, various forms of faith. And when Jupiter is square Mars, then we can see challenges regarding faith. Okay, we can see people fighting over philosophy. Okay, or over their spirituality, their religion. We can also see, some kind of a tension between our actions and our optimism. Again, it's like being overly enthusiastic about something, and then as a result, rushing in where angels fear to tread. Okay. And so that combination then, currently still in this hard aspect with Ceres, then does call into question, impacts on resources as a result of ideology and conflict. Okay. So I think that has had an impact on some of the ongoing conflicts happening around the world. Okay. Um, and that's, I mean, that's inherent in warfare, that that resources are going to be impacted. But right now, um, you know, people who are especially experiencing the brunt of that um, may be having those issues heightened for them. Note, however, that Ceres is retrograde. So again, we're looking at more internal processes, um, a personalized awareness of difficulties between, getting the resources that we need, and dealing with conflicts with others. Okay. Um, Mars opposite Ceres does suggest loss of or destruction of the resources that we need to be able to eat. Okay. And so I do feel like Jupiter in this equation, while he does make things bigger, is also trying to help us to keep the faith while we are feeling challenged about this kind of stuff. And this, again, there doesn't have to be like, an actual physical conflict going on for this to manifest. For those of us in the United States, seeing higher and higher prices at the grocery store is, um, an example of struggles with Ceres related themes. Note that Mars does rule Aries, where Ceres currently is. So again, going back to, what is it that we can take away from this that is helpful? Then there are ultimately there's questions about self-sufficiency and community here, because these cardinal signs, Aries is associated with the individual, but where is Mars? Mars is in Libra, which is concerned with relationships and with justice and with fairness. And Jupiter in Cancer is concerned with home and family, yes, but also community, tribe, those people who are closest to us. Okay. And so I would say the biggest question here is, how willing are we to be supportive of each other in getting our basic human needs met? And this T square can, can challenge us to step up, to help our neighbors as well as ourselves, to help our communities as well as ourselves. But Jupiter can also relate to government. And I think that this T square also is showing up some of the challenges that are happening as a result of government action that may not be too kind to both individuals and communities. And so it is up to us, both as individuals and as communities, to come together to help each other to meet our needs. That's what I would interpret that T square as. The grand water trine, of course, links both of these configurations, right? Because they're linked by Jupiter there. Jupiter is a factor in both, okay? So this grand water trine has Jupiter trine the north node in Pisces and Lilith in Scorpio. And then that trine forms the body of a kite with the south node in Virgo. Okay. So the north node in Pisces is classically ruled by Jupiter. So that amplifies Jupiter's influence in this. Okay. And that north node is it's what we are perhaps hungry for, moving toward, lessons that we need to learn, but they can be uncomfortable lessons, okay, because they're unfamiliar. It's strange territory. It's stuff we don't know yet. Um, and depending upon, whether you're looking at the North Node from a Western tropical astrology standpoint or a Vedic or Jyotish standpoint, right? That's going to slightly change the meaning of that North Node and how we face it. There can be things that kind of dredge up our fears. There can be kind of a haunted, fateful quality to the North Node. Okay. And trine Lilith is in Scorpio, has been hanging out with Juno and Vesta in Scorpio. Okay. And Lilith very much relates to our deepest truth, our authentic sense of self that is willing to kind of defy the mainstream standards, that it asserts our sovereignty regardless of whether or not others are happy with that. Okay. And she can bring up some of our more reactive behaviors. Okay. Because, she's this demonized feminine figure. Okay. And so she can bring up our sense of alienation, our feelings that, where we feel like we're not respected, or, that we're being oppressed in some way. And she's not interested in tolerating that. So she can show us where we're inclined to lash out about those things and how. And in the case of her being in Scorpio, that means there's going to be some scorpionic reactions to the things that we don't like or feel oppressed by. So that can bring out the sting of the scorpion's tail. Okay. That can dredge up deep suspicions. Okay. Because Scorpio is good at digging into the things that are underneath the surface, okay, that are, perhaps the motivations of people around us that we don't see in ordinary interactions, okay, but they are what are motivating people or determining how they're going to behave in any given situation. And Lilith in Scorpio is going to be inclined to see, some of the worst in terms of people's motivations. So it's important for us to not let our fears, our suspicions, carry us away at this time, because there is a real danger of that. Again, anytime we've got Jupiter in the picture, even though he's trying to be helpful, he just makes things big. Okay. And here with a grand water trine, it's big emotion, big feelings. Okay. And those big feelings with the North Node involved, it can feel like, I'm fated to be betrayed, that kind of thing. Or, or I'm fated to be in conflict with others around me. Okay. Or I hunger for something that I'm feeling that's really deep, but I can't express it. Okay. That's a big possibility. But this grand water trine also being the body of a kite with the South Node, then encourages us to take the Virgo action of, let's see what we can let go of. Where can we release the more toxic patterns, any toxic feelings that we've got going on? Okay. And in particular, where can we take practical actions, little practical actions in day-to-day life to kind of help balance out the ship, right? we're sailing in deep waters with a grand water trine. So how can we do little practical things, adjust our habits, maybe work on fixing some things in our physical environment, tend to our bodies, all of that kind of thing, in order to face the big feelings and let go of the stuff that isn't serving us. And of course, the elephant in the room of this particular of our conversation tonight is that there's an eclipse coming up, a lunar eclipse, which is going to be at that north node. And so the Uranus station is kind of pulling in some of that. Again, it's like that foreshadowing, right? Pulling in some of the vibes of that eclipse. Eclipses are an axis of change, and Uranus is all about change. So I really feel like all of this is pointing to the need for us to do internal work that is going to lay the ground for dealing with other changes in our lives, right? That we do the internal work now and embrace internal change so that when external change shows up, it doesn't blindside us.
That's great advice. I like that very much. And I will be back with another show on the eclipse tomorrow. Oh, so we have a few other aspects here. We have a square, we have Moon square Juno Vesta, and as you mentioned earlier, the ongoing minor grand trine between Uranus, Pluto, and Saturn, Neptune. So any comments here, additional comments that you want to make?
So at the time of Uranus' station, we had the Moon square Juno and Vesta, which is also going to, tie in a little bit to the Lilith themes, because Lilith is hanging out there as well. And the moon is or was in Aquarius at the time of the station, right? Moon in Aquarius is inclined more to think about feelings rather than to get into the soft, squishy feeling of the feeling. And it, is concerned with group dynamics, is concerned with causes, is concerned with what is logical and what supports good social systems. Okay. But squaring off against Juno and Vesta, that makes for some kind of social discomfort. Okay. Juno, of course, relates to relationships, relates to promises, relates to our oaths, relates to, what is the social fabric? What are the institutions that we will compromise to uphold? The relationships that, we're going to try to meet others halfway in order to keep those relationships going. And Juno in Scorpio is very concerned with what are the emotional underpinnings of those relationships, okay? And what are the power dynamics within those relationships and within the institutions that, we either decide that we're going to uphold or that we are going to, break ties with, right? And, she's conjoined with Vesta, and Vesta is very much our focus. Okay, she is the sacred flame, the keeper of the sacred flame and the hearth. Okay, but since she's named for a Roman goddess, that's the hearth of empire, not simply the hearth of home. In her Greek form as Hestia, she's more concerned with home, right? But as Vesta, she is, what keeps the society going, Okay. Where is the sacred flame of the country? Whatever the country is. Okay. So in this particular case, when she is conjoined by Juno, then there really is this focus on like, what are the underpinnings of our society? What are the power dynamics at work with our institutions? Do we agree with them? Do we want to keep things going as the way that they are, or are we going to reshape them in some way? Okay. What is our sense of loyalty to any of this? Okay. And when the moon is in Aquarius, which is concerned with social issues and with causes and group dynamics, when that moon is squaring off against those, then there's going to be tension that needs to be resolved with regard to what are our feelings about the society and its power dynamics versus what is actually logical or practical about it. Okay. What, how do the systems actually work? How do we integrate with those systems? And, and how do we feel about that? Okay. And so, yeah, so that's some underlying tension. And I feel like it's an interesting note to start off this retrograde on, since we're looking at a retrograde of a planet associated with change, a planet who is trine Pluto, is in that ongoing minor grand trine with all of the outer planets and with Saturn. That's really, reconsidering. They're all reconsidering their themes. And their themes are very much social because they're outer planets. They're concerned with generational stuff, with worldwide stuff. Okay. Not just any particular country or society, though they definitely have an impact on, everybody who's living at the same time. Okay. So yeah, I feel like that question of what serves our society, what serves us as individuals within that society, where are we willing to um, accommodate, where are we willing to compromise, where are we willing to meet others halfway, and where do we need to say, what, no, the buck stops here, and I'm not willing to keep doing things in that way. I'm not willing to continue this association, this relationship, until the power dynamics shift. Or maybe I'm not willing to continue it at all if the power dynamics, can't shift, right? Note that moon and that Juno in Vesta are in fixed signs. So they're stubborn, right? So this isn't like, oh yes, I can, snap my fingers and go, yeah, I'm going to change things and I'm going to, I'm going to get things to work out the way that I want to on a dime, right? That's not going to happen with fixed signs. And yet, where is Uranus? Uranus is an immutable sign, and Uranus is all about sudden change. So again, going back to what I said before, I feel like there's this internal process that needs to happen with all of these outer planets retrograde, right? And with Saturn, a social planet, retrograde. Okay. There's this internal process that needs to be happening in order for us to do the work on the changes within that need to happen, because when they go direct, we may find that change is a lot more sudden than it is now. Okay. That there are big shifts on the way. And we need to be prepared for them, but we need to prepare inside first before we can prepare externally or consciously.
Thank you. That's great. And I want to thank you for joining me today, Simon, and all those that have watched live and all those that come back and watch at a later date. We appreciate your support. And I'll let Simon tell you about her Patreon page.
Oh, thank you. So I have a small community on Patreon, and I make custom astrological art for my patrons there. Excuse me. Oh, oh goodness. Ah, and I write about the transits, and I make art about the transits. And like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer. So if you wish to schedule a consult with me, you can visit my website at iconalchemy.com.
And like Simon said, I do consultations. I have a newsletter, a YouTube channel, and social media. So you can join or sign up on any of those. I appreciate that. And there's a lot of other upcoming shows with Astrology Star Sisters and miscellaneous other astrologers, and lots to go back and watch. Check it out. And I will be on Talk Cosmos on September 14th, talking about the Virgo solar eclipse at 29 degrees Virgo. And I want to thank our sponsor, Astro Peregrine Software. It's an astrology software program for Mac and Windows. And you can find more information at astroperegrine.com. And we're going to say goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Simon.
Thank you.